Hello and welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martins, and I'm super happy to have Brandon on for a number of times. I can't even count anymore. Had him on over and over. He's become a really good connection, and I'll even say friend over the last years, slogging through the mud and the crap and the corruption. So we're here to talk about the mud and the crap and the corruption around money, particularly in the truth world. So without further ado, I do see, Brendan, you're in the back end now. Looks like you got all the little bugs worked out. Give me a thumbs up when you're ready to come on and we'll get started. Okay, he's good to go. All right. Welcome, Brendan. Nice to see you.
Hello again.
Welcome. Nice to have you here. And we're going to get started pretty soon. I want to say hello to Silimo, who I've become good friends with. If you guys aren't on X, you know, a lot of people complain about X. I tried so hard to tag you, by the way, Brendan. I don't know. It's just not letting me. Certain people doesn't let me do that. And but I'm meeting such good people there. So it's not the platform, it's the people. I just happen to, you know, it's interesting. I'll just chat a little bit right now. I did a post on frequencies. And you might notice if you're, yeah, I can see by that smile that it's very.
A lot of people get triggered.
Oh boy. Yeah.
I've seen the BS of that throughout the years. I mean, gosh.
I know. It's been coming down the pike or the pipe or however you say that for a long time. It's not new anything, but it's being pushed into the media like it never has been before. Yeah. And so I did a post on X about frequencies and just let people know how, you know, frequencies, they do not heal. I know I tried this big time. I got sick with a stage 4 lymphoma when my frequency was higher than ever. And so, you know, it's not unrelated. Yet we're in the same echo chamber, Silimo. Exactly. It's not unrelated to healing, but it's not the cause of healing. And so it can, do you mind if I just speak my truth here for a second? Is that,
go ahead.
Well, anyway, can't stop me. So frequencies, you know, raising your frequency does in fact make it more possible for you to do the difficult healing work and to go in and make new decisions and change the structure of how you are, you know, believing, thinking, and the programs that are underneath that. But in and of itself, if you only use frequencies to heal, what ends up happening is you raise your frequency and you raise your frequency. And what do you ultimately become is blind, more blinded, because higher energy is actually, we think it's more self-aware. It's not. That's where a lot of stuff can hit you blindside. And, you know, people are desperate for solutions right now. They might have been through all of the medical system mainstream wise and got no results. And then they turned to the alternative and they went through that. And then they got no results in the long term. They often get short-term results, which is exactly what frequencies give you. They have this seemingly miraculous instant effect, like, oh my goodness. I was talking to a good friend, I hope he doesn't mind. And, you know, with one of those devices, he got instant results and he thought like, oh, wow, all my life, I wish I had known this. But they diminished over time and they stopped working and all of the symptoms and everything came back. So what happens is that most people end up believing that frequencies are healing. And when they stop working, they still run that belief and they keep using the thing, hoping against hope that it's working and not even being able to articulate that it's not working because of the belief. Anyway, that's really deep in my world. I'll let anybody know that if you want to hear more inside my head, that's in the House of Free Will. Brandon has given some good workshops in there that I still stand by, which sometimes it's hard to, you know, as things go, I do have to remove a few things there now because they are now what I see to be misleading.
Yeah, and you accidentally had some gurus on.
Right, exactly. Not as much in the House of Free Will. I've been more careful there, or had the guru on for the right topic where it, you know, it didn't end up with a bunch of holes in it like cheese. But There's a few of them. So anyway, if you want to connect with me and be more up close with me and hear, I've got nearly 100 videos, snippets since I started the House of Free Will on what's in my head and my heart and teaching people as I go. So that's where my best friends are, my inner circle is. And you can find a link below, or just visit my website to apply to be a member of the House of Free Will. So there's my commercial and my rant. And then we're going to get into today's content. So if you're not familiar with Brenton, he is the creator of Safe Haven Co., which is a company that he helps people financially to understand, and now I'm asking Brenton today to go way back, probably to a place that you wouldn't have gone and might even seem like, oh, really? We're going to talk about what the fuck is money? Because I know that's a baby question for you. But what I've noticed in the truth world is that people are extremely led astray. So one of the last times I saw in my Canadian Court Procedure group, they're talking about, oh, the government prints money and that causes inflation. I just went like, oh, let's at least do our part to put an end to this way of thinking, because it is not helping anyone. And I know people have gone off and been convinced to invest in metals and all kinds of wrong directions. We've talked a lot about that in different live streams. So sometimes some of this stuff might be repeated, but I think it bears repeating because those, like I was talking about before, beliefs die hard. And as soon as you have it, you just glom on and attach to it. And it gives you a fake sense of safety or control because you think you understand. It all is rigged against us in those beliefs. It makes us not participate with a system that otherwise we could get some benefit from, right? It's not about destroying the public or at least, destroying your participation with the public. It's about being limber and seeing what are your choices and where is it strategic to participate in the public, and how to do that in a way that's not going to harm you unnecessarily, which people don't know, and when to be in the private, and when that protects you, and what that really means.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, most people even know, especially from the movement. I mean, they have really perverted what the public and private is. I think we've talked about that a little bit.
A lot, yeah.
But yeah, so we're here to talk about what is money. I like that we're kind of going back to square one. Because a lot of times I can get so deep in the minutia, I can go quite deep, and we might lose some people. So it's good to start at the foundation of it all. That because saying the dollar is debt, worthless debt, or a scam, that isn't going to help your bank balance.
Right, and that's true. Would you mind, by the way, I didn't warn you about this yet, but I'd like to start with some psychology of money.
Sure. I actually had that idea too.
You had that. Okay.
Yeah.
We're on the same page. That's awesome. And so what I notice is that for those people that are already familiar with my work, that I have outlined the archetypes of the hero's journey. And every single one of those archetypes has a relationship to money, but in a different way, with a different motive, right? So a child's motive for getting more responsible with money might actually be driven by a fear of not surviving, right? You have people come to you maybe a little later in life and they realize, oh, I better start something now, when it we don't want to say too late. It's never too late to wake up to reality. The rebel might use money as a way to cause a stir and to ruffle feathers. And in a way, I'm using my work and my business that way, that it allows me to give messages that might be contrary, but actually helpful and purposeful. So that's always the hope. A warrior would use money to build out infrastructure in the long haul, so that there is something to build and grow on, and a foundation for the work that they want to do and the life they want to have. Nurturers use money, I'm going in order here, to help others almost always. Nurturers can be super responsible with money, but they go broke giving it away to charities, to causes, to fake people in the truth movement that you think, where we got Rocco Galati getting taken to task for all of his shenanigans, and lots of people felt sorry for him. And, and his health and his heart attack and all this kind of
Always,
stuff,
they always have the
right?
health issues.
Right. I even sent him $50, totally regret it now. So that's the nurturer. I'll go really quickly through this and then I'll turn it to you, your perceptions. And the lover might use money as a way to fuel their ability to create and self-express and really, say who they are and be who they are and give the value of that. A hedonist would use money because it's the pleasure factor, right? It's fun, it's enjoyable to receive, it's enjoyable to give, it's enjoyable to have some luxuries in life. That's similar to the king, but in between, or actually that is the king next after the hedonist. And then the king would see money as a way to build an empire where many people could thrive and to scale the goodness that they're putting out if they're not a tyrant or a dark king. And then the alchemist is really fascinating with money. They end up with a belief very often that it is a source of evil. And so they get mad at money and they get grumpy with money and they keep pointing at where money has created evil effects and then really debilitate their own ability to navigate with it. And so, and there's a program of love-hate. So they end up with this love-hate relationship. They really want it and they really don't want it at the same time and go nowhere fast because of that. So that's how I see the psychology of money. What do you notice?
I mean, besides all the archetypes, which I think is useful, but I think the main idea of money in people's minds, around the world is across all ages too. Everyone frames money as a store of value, and I strongly disagree with that sentiment. You see, believing this disproportionately benefits those who already have wealth. So you're conflating hoarding rather than circulation. I personally, I see money not as a resource, because when you view it as a resource, you're viewing it as a scarce resource, right? So it's a lot of the woo crowd. They'll say the scarcity mindset, right? Money is not a resource, but a tool. So this misunderstanding, it particularly harms lower income people by suggesting their money problems stem from failure to store value properly, rather than breaking from the fear around money. So the store value concept, it feeds also into financial nihilism. So when people discover that money doesn't actually store value, especially in the last several years, due to all sorts of factors we'll talk about today, they may conclude the entire monetary system is fraudulent, rather than recognizing that they misunderstood money's primary function. It's a tool. Now, money is most effective when it's circulating through an economy. It's facilitating value and productive exchanges. So, not when it's treated as an end in and of itself to be accumulated and stored. Now, you mentioned the alchemist archetype. They see money as evil. They have that love-hate relationship, because yes, they believe it's evil, but then they also realize in order to do anything in this world, well, it requires money. So most people, and it goes outside just the alchemist archetype. I think most people believe money is the root of all evil, or at least that's what they tell themselves. And often their behavior and what they tell themselves can be different too, but that's a whole nother thing. I strongly disagree that money is the root of all evil. What we need to think about is, what is the need for money? Well, that gets into some of the sins: greed, discontent, lust for more, right? So by default, you're by default viewing money as a resource in this mode. So it's not money itself that's the root of evil. Remember, money is fiction. It's thinking that you have a lack of it and an entitlement for more that's evil. And really, it stems into the addiction to worldliness. So
Very good.
that's
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Do you want me to jump in a little bit there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
we were right on the same page. I was thinking about that last night, how, money for sure can bring up lust and greed and deceit, right? One of the money archetypes that I help people read is the accumulator. And one of their shadows is secrecy around money. So even from maybe their husband or their wife or the closest people closest to them, they keep their cards really close and they don't share about stuff that they would both benefit from knowing. So yes, and then I thought about, so that's like the dark side of it. And then there's also the psychology of money can be around industriousness and provision, right? Like how many men or whomever is responsible for dependents, and they are providing through this, and responsibility and maturity, all kinds of things. I had a coach a long time ago when I was really grumpy about money, and she's like, grow up, Beth, like this, right? She just delivered some real tough love, but I don't usually coach like that, just so you guys know. I'm I'm not harsh, but so we live in slave society, and I'm glad you just said it outright. Money is fiction. And it
Right.
is an installation of slave society. This is something that you and Clint Richardson helped me really get home, because the sovereignty movement is going, we're free, we're really free. And it's like, no, you are an indentured slave.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in depth between you and I, Clint, you and I, and Clint and I together. So, yeah, I don't think we need to exhaust that point too much today. But yeah, it's I like that you kind of you brought it, you related money to relationships, because that's another aspect we often breeze over. But yeah, often in our childhood, the first conversations, or only ones about money in your household growing up were unpleasant ones.
Right.
Typically, dad was stressed out about money, and mom nagged dad for more things. Right? You get the idea. 9 out of 10 spousal fights are related to finances. So yeah, you witnessed a repeat of so many generations of pleb thinking. Now we equate money with I see it so much in society where the equation of money in people's head is labor spent equals money. So, um, but yeah, when you view it, because this relates back to my early adult life. As soon as I was 18, I was kicked out of my house completely on my own. I was rather destitute. Had a couple of Job experiences that we've talked about a little bit, Beth, but yeah, I've experienced both sides of the pendulum. Poverty and wealth. And man, what I can tell you is, when I was in poverty, I viewed money as this resource. I viewed in the frame of my past and the family relations, all that kind of stuff came into play. And that was when I was working a job. Okay, at the time I was working two jobs because I was just making minimum wage. As an 18-year-old, no skills or anything, I thought there wasn't much I could do. Right, that's what society tells you. Oh, I had to go to school, all this kind of stuff. Well, the second because I remember back then I had $1,000. I thought that was like finally, oh, I caught a break. Like 18-year-old, $1,000. Seems like a lot more than what it is now, right? But anyways, as soon as I viewed that $1,000 not as $1,000 that I only have, but it's something that I could use to create more money. So, for example, I could use that $1,000 to buy things for $2 and then sell it for $4, let's say. So one of my first business ventures was flipping clothes online. It's kind of a weird niche that was in my age group at that time, and I saw some opportunity. So that was my first introduction to really using money as a tool, and I just thought, wow, this is just such a world of difference just from a simple shift like that mentally. So
Mhm.
that was my
Right.
first experience with kind of the psychology of money. And throughout the years, I saw that kind of case study more exemplified throughout my business experience, past ventures, and older mentors. Showed me a lot that I wouldn't have been able to see on my own. So yeah,
Mhm.
the psychology, I think, that is really the root problem, because not only do we have the emotional side of it, the emotional baggage a lot of people have related to money, but we also have a financial literacy problem. Okay. I can't remember the poll exactly, but I believe it was 60 to even as high as 80% of adults consider themselves financially illiterate. Okay. And I really don't like people to use that term even for themselves, even if you are, because that is a adage that financially illiterate. That's an old adage that I think is used to further implement the pleb thinking that's been multi-generational here. So
Can I jump in? Can you define pleb for me? I'm a
yeah,
pop
a
culture
pleb. Well,
moron. I hear you say it
I
all the time.
I probably won't give the proper definition, but the pleb to me is just a pleb, um, kind of employee mindset. You're you're thinking like a slave essentially, right? And most people are plebs, unfortunately, in today's society. So yeah, but I mean, back then, a pleb just meant you didn't have really any property. You were working under the servitude of the king, right? And really, has much changed at all? I don't think so for most people.
Exactly, or gotten worse.
We're a little more comfortable now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to point one thing out. I know you're on a really good track there. Is that fear around money, as plebs in a slave society to one degree or another. I consider myself a little bit more free, but in the grand scheme, I'm still just as controlled at a bottom line level. But that all of the discomfort, all of the machinations that we go through, all of the emotional stuff, it really does boil down to the fear of not surviving, because we're the only animal on earth that has to pay to live. Right? The moment you have a baby, you actually start seeing, oh wow, right? Like every little thing that they use, it's consuming. It's a mass consumption, and a big fear that people won't have children because they can't afford it and all of those kind of things. So the fear of not surviving is a great way to begin the process, rather than just, framework does matter, mentors matter a lot, but it can be just moving furniture around on the Titanic rather than going to the source of the problem.
Yeah, so I think our presentation will help people's view on money. Because we'll cover all the narratives that you most likely buy, and gosh, I've been following that nutritionist you've been recommending on Twitter. Speaking
Oh,
of
good.
Twitter,
Good for
and I saw
you.
he had a tweet the other day. He was like, and people think they question stuff until they find my work, and I'm like, man, this is the tweet of my life. Like, because yeah, I mean, and we can go down that rabbit hole to help, but I mean, I think between that and this stuff, the really the narratives keeping the public trapped uh, about around money is, gosh, I mean, it's just, I think it's one of is the biggest issues that we're facing right now. Because, like you said, society, the way it's built and designed, yes, we're basically just wallets. Um, so
Walking wallets. Yeah, there's a good sobering
yeah,
thought. Yeah.
and yeah, you think about it, like man, my whole life I'm just driving around and buying things. Like I started having that realization a long time ago, and I realized, well, wait a second, we have these behavior patterns, and there's all these companies selling me these things or services, right? And some of them happen to be public on the stock market, and it all relates to all of our actions and decisions. So that kind of got me past and I mean other stuff did too, but like this one in particular, it got me past the victim narrative I was telling myself. Like, oh, this, money and all that is only for fat cats, stuff like that. When I started to see the big picture, then you start to realize, okay, look, I know the system exists, whether I accept it or not. It's just a matter of, do I know how to use it to my advantage or not? Because I could see it in my mentors. They definitely were using it to their advantage. So that's what I want to talk about today, besides just the idea of money. But
Exactly. So Brendan is really good at creating presentations. I'm looking forward to that. And you can set up your share screen anytime you like. And
sure.
I'll just make a plug for reality. I like reality a lot, even though it can be intensely painful. Right. You brought up nutrition detective Garrett Smith, and
Yeah.
boy, that was painful to take on the reality of like realizing that most of my diet is poisonous. Ah,
Mm,
fascinating. Okay, well,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And just like money, most people's decisions with it and thinking uh, is just breaking any potential that they could have in that realm. So
exactly. Another kind of poison. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just like the diet. You have all these influencers talking, health influencers talking about keto this or vegetarian or vegan that. So yeah, you're gonna fall into these niche traps, I like to call it, and then yeah, you're just endlessly searching for more and more, because you don't fix the root problem here.
Right on. Great metaphor. See, truth you can apply across the board on all the subjects.
And money is one of those things. Money is like a scorecard. I mean, you cannot escape the reality of it. Um, it's very it's easy to enumerate, right? And it's quite obvious how right or wrong you are.
Right. It's fun because I have to do a quarterly report to our Canadian government, and I really hate doing that. But it is like a life review, a mini little quarterly life review, and I go back and I see, oh wow, she did that and she did that, and then this gain and this loss, and I guess I'm one of those people. I'm attracted to you and your work because I have suffered all of this, and then in addition suffered the truth or shiny object thing around money and all that nonsense. So I've been grateful to have you in the back end, and I lost a lot of friends when I started talking to you, and no, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but it's
Nah.
good. It's good
Yes.
because now they don't try to convince me or indoctrinate me or come after me, and I'm not tuned into all of those kind of channels anymore. So
Mm.
it's a liberating thing, and
Well,
there's
yeah. I mean,
to learn.
do you notice the difference?
Oh yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I love reality. When you get down to it, it's way less expensive on the energy, right?
Yes.
You just deal with what is.
Yeah. So we'll first talk about the narratives that you most likely believe around money and like the Fed and all that kind of stuff first, and then we'll get into how does money actually get created and that kind of stuff. So
Okay, fantastic. Should I put your presentation up?
sure.
Okay. There we go.
So yeah, what I have here is Jerome Powell. He's the head of the Federal Reserve, uh, the central bank here in the United States, of course. So yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions, especially in the movement around the Fed, and I, for the longest time, believed some of it myself as well. I believe that the Fed was privately owned, and I believed that they were stockholders in banks, not realizing the full context of that last statement. And it's not actually what people think. Um, so I think that's probably one of the biggest narratives to break for people from the movement. Now, Clinton Richardson and I, we did an in-depth breakdown on what is going on with the Federal Reserve. But yeah, basically, people mistakenly consider the Fed to be a private entity, but it's actually as public as it gets. I'm gonna show you how so in this presentation, but it is far from a private entity. Okay, now what it is a government agency. It's an independent government agency. That's the legal structure of it. So no, it's not technically a corporation. Because remember, often people say it's a for-profit corporation as well, but think about this. If that's the case, well, the Federal Reserve is just a function of the nation state of the United States, right? And really, the Fed, if we're talking about the Fed, I mean, it's the whole world. But man, people from the movement, they see it from a bottom up approach rather than top down. So you're not getting the big picture. And what they say is, yeah, it's a private for profit corporation. Okay, well, where's the corporate charter? Is it filed in Delaware? Is it filed in Wyoming? Show me the corporate. And the answer is there isn't, because corporations or governments, when they set up a group, an entity, an independent agency like the Federal Reserve, nothing of this. A corporation, you file through the government, right, on the state level. Why would the government need to do that for their own groups, right? Their own. So yeah, that is the first narrative to break. Now we also broke down a lot of the lies that were put in the Creatures of Jekyll Island. That book is full of falsehoods that he can never actually prove. It's just a story. You're reading a story essentially. So you really have to unlearn all of that if you want to understand the Federal Reserve, what's going on with that. Now it's also different, because the Federal Reserve, people get kind of confused because they see that banks are members of the Federal Reserve. Okay, if you're going to be a bank in the United States, you have to be a member of the central bank, and that's where they get their lending. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, think of it like as an association of banks, essentially. And some will go even as far as John Sneisen. I think that's his name. We did a little talk, the three of us.
Yeah.
He was, just saying without any proof that yes, the J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America, they own shares of the Federal Reserve, so therefore they control it. But again, that's bottom up approach rather than top down. Look, the Federal Reserve is not technically a for-profit corporation. They the shares is not like ownership shares. It's actually just so they can participate in the lending activity that the Fed facilitates. So yeah, of course, some of the largest banks here in the United States, they're going to be members of this association that is the Fed, right? Why wouldn't they? They do most of the transactions in the United States. So yeah, so by law, it is a condition that the members of the Federal Reserve get so-called stock. But if you actually look into the stock allocations, it's they don't get any profit from it, and it's not stock in a private company. It's just they get a dividend payment from the Fed because basically they're pulling their money into this reserve bank, the bank reserves, right? So they get the dividend, but really that's not like they're making a profit from it. It's quite complex. We talked about it in depth in this presentation, so I won't bore you with the details there.
No worries. So you can visit Brendan's channel and find that. I'll just share a link in the chat quickly so that you can go into a lot of detail on it on your own.
Yeah. Now another thing is, they say that the Fed needs to be audited, right? Like Ron Paul, he for years he's just been pushing this narrative like we need to audit the Fed. Well, what they and I know he knows this for a fact because he helped push bills to further implement independent audits of the Fed, right? So there are CAFRs. That's an acronym, basically a comprehensive annual financial report. But yeah, the Fed is audited. It's like I said, as public as it gets. So you can actually get their entire balance sheet, assets, that kind of stuff, debts, on their website. It's all public information. Now, the Fed's function is not to just endlessly print money and that kind of stuff like we're told by the movement. And I'll talk about how inflation isn't created through money printing. Money printing is kind of a false thing that we've been brought on. But yeah, what I have pulled up here is a nation's financial structure. Okay, so just like on the dollar, you have the pyramid, right? And on the top of that pyramid, as far as money is concerned, that's going to be the central bank. Now, if you want to look into it, which Clint and I have done, the central bank is influenced by private associations, like the Club of Washington, stuff like that. We won't have to get into that too much, but really that's unimportant because, a lot of that stuff is behind closed doors. We're not going to be able to see that kind of stuff. What we can see is the Fed's monetary policy. That, like I said, it's as public as it gets because they are literally structuring and designing and controlling the economy for the public. So underneath the central bank, they make all the monetary decisions, right? And I'll kind of walk through how their monetary decisions eventually do impact both consumers and businesses here and the economy, as you can see here. But yeah, this is kind of like the trickle down effect. So the monetary policy is set by the central bank, and they're basically making money more expensive or cheaper to borrow. That's that's essentially what you can think monetary policy as. And then it trickles down into the economy to businesses and consumers. So think of it like this: if the central bank, if they make more money more expensive, that's going to impact businesses and consumers. They're probably going to get less loans, right? Whereas if they make lending cheaper, that is going to expand economic activity. So they just don't do it willy nilly, like, oh, we're just deciding to do it this day or that day. It's actually they're just controlling the economy. So the last few years, well, 2020 especially, we saw inflation throughout 2022. That 2-year time period, inflation, go up quite a bit here around the world, really. So that's when interest rates were pretty low, right? So anyways, we'll talk about the mechanics of that in a second. But I just want to show you this diagram because, underneath the pyramid, you have two types of businesses. You have businesses that are either making things or they're doing things, right? So yeah, it's a really easy way to slice and dice the economy up simply in a diagram. But I'm gonna explain the full minutia here as we go on. Now let's cover some basics about the dollar itself before we get into how it's created. Because Beth, I think you asked me before we started. People are wondering, why is the dollar so dominant, right? Why is it the reserve currency of the world? We talked about that a little bit, but I first want to show the numbers here before I start, sharing the facts. But
Sure.
the dollar is almost 62% of the world reserves. So that just means, of all the countries around the world, 60% of their currency reserves are in the U.S. dollar. As you can see, everyone else is quite lower. The euro only 20%. Everyone else is trickling down further than that. So yeah, as much as people say the Chinese yuan is a major threat to the dollar, or the Russian ruble, which is even bigger of a joke, this pie chart really sets the reality in for people. So
Yeah, that's a great pie chart. I appreciate that so much because if someone just says, "Oh, the yen's going to overtake the U.S. dollar," and then you can see, no, just
how? Yeah, and we'll go through how it, stuff like that couldn't be possible. Just based the way that the system has been baked. Okay, the dollar is baked into the system ever since World War II. So we'll talk about that. Now, another important factor is, let's think about GDP real quick. You can think of GDP as percentage of the world economy by each country. So in total, the U.S. is 25% of the world economy. Everyone else is well underneath that. I mean, even with the European Union together, still dwarfs, or still a dwarf in comparison to the United States. So, and then China, of course, if you can even believe their GDP, that's in third place. So, yeah. Another thing is, look, GDP. I think I've talked about this before in our last show. You can think of it like an income of a country, of a nation state. So in the total world, we have over $100 trillion economy worldwide. Now, United States is 25% or 26% of that almost, and you can see why. Another reason why the dollar is so dominant, right? Because because yeah, everyone else falls behind in that. So kind of like Beth was talking about earlier, where you start to realize, man, we're just consumers. Well, America, you can see we're the biggest consumers of the world. I mean, of any other country. So this is the dollar index. Okay, so this is just tracking what the market is valuing the dollar at, and often called the Dixie. This is the dollar index. So what I have pulled up is it going all the way back from 1970s to today. Um, Now, the doomers will have you imagine that this chart is just going straight down like a hockey stick, right? Um, but we can see this large spike in the 1980s, and this relates back to interest rates and the Fed monetary policy. Um, so, so back then, inflation was getting quite high, and Reagan implemented quite high interest rates, some of the highest that we've seen since. This is when interest rates were way above than where we are today. And so when interest rates go up, when debt uh, becomes more expensive, the value of the dollar actually goes up. Because something of it like this: if you're sitting on a fat cash position in a time where lending becomes more expensive, well, now your dollars have a lot more power because you don't you don't have to borrow such a high rate. So yeah, it's interesting. And then ever since then, it's gone down a little bit, just because we haven't been in high rates like we were back then. But we can see that the Dixie, that's still holding up firm. Um, what I have here is just the percentage of change. What you don't see is the dollar amount, but as of today, it's still sitting above $1 and some change. So yes, you have the dollar, but it's actually worth more than that right now.
And it's interesting, if I could just comment on that last
Yeah.
slide for a second, that I was looking specifically at the years of our madness, COVIDian madness, starting in 2020. And
Yeah.
so, that's when the doom porn really came down, right? That
Yes.
it's dying, it's really happening. It's this week, it's next week. Go get a tiny home and a truck, which I did.
Yeah.
And, and so we're not really seeing that level of instability. There was a dip there. And I
Yeah.
think, what was that due to? Just all the shutdowns?
Yeah. So you had a major contraction in GDP because, yeah, with all the shutdowns, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, the whole economy is just shut down. And, the uncertainty, of course. So any asset class, whether it's a currency or gold or stocks or real estate, in a time like that, all assets are going to drop. So that renders your hedge in Bitcoin or, gold or whatever useless in times like that. And that was a black swan event. So in a black swan event, it makes all risk models rendered useless.
And could I ask a question here? That do you think these kind of things get, like, the black swans are obviously engineered at many levels, and
Mhm.
do you think they're engineered specifically financially so that people can swoop in and buy the cheap stocks and buy the cheap dollar? And what do you think?
Um, I mean, partially, but like you got to think the controllers, um, they're not really thinking of it in that framework. Like,
Okay.
yes, the plebs can take advantage of that in that sense. But what the plebs aren't privy to often is that in markets, the smart money, we're directionally agnostic, and I'll talk about that later. But essentially, you can make money from assets dropping in price, right? So you can benefit from whatever movement. So yeah, that's kind of a moot point, I would say.
Okay.
But
Uh,
yes, I mean, for sure. I mean, if, they're using both directions to make money from all of this, and the markets is just a tool for that.
right. Right. Okay. Great. Thanks. Keep going.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, right after it shot right up the value of the dollar. Now another thing is I want to compare it to GDP because yes, you have the Dixie kind of doing its thing, it relatively stable around this range. But what I have overlaid on top of it is US GDP, which is quite a bit. It's so over the years, this increased over 3,000%. In Dixie, ever since the 1970s, it's gone down 13%. So, in comparison, I mean, gosh, I mean, how could you even say the dollar is dead? Because, okay, from its peak, it's down 13%. Like, I mean, it's not too crazy here. I should say the peak, but on average, right? Um, Now, GDP, remember, it's the income of the country. So, as much as people say, the dollar is debt, and the deficit is just getting too big. Um, yeah, this is the chart I want to show. Um, the federal debt, it's at what, 33 trillion now? What a magic number. um, but yeah, so as much as Elon Musk is saying, the U.S. is bankrupt. Well, how can it go bankrupt to itself? And I'll kind of explain the mechanics of that later. um, in relation to the national debt and the dollar. But yeah, I mean, the U.S. has more than enough money to pay off the debt anytime it wants. Even if it didn't, it could print money to do so, which I'll show you. They actually don't print money to create more money supply. But yeah, and what I have here on this chart is the dollar in the red. But if you went long the dollar and shorted the Chinese yuan, that trade is up 136% since the 1980s. So yeah, as much as people say the Chinese yuan is a threat, I mean, gosh, I mean, what a great comparison to show that of the trade, And when we think of the forex market, and this is what I'm showing you essentially, the foreign exchange market. I mean, if you do this, really, with a lot of currencies, you're going to see that similar pattern here. That going long the dollar and shorting other currencies is going to give you a return like this. So, we'll kind of talk about the value of the dollar later. But another thing that they, because John Sneisen, he's a great example. He's like a great sigil of what I call the doomers. And not to rip on the guy, I'm just saying, like, we've talked about this before. And I remember him specifically. He was talking about Japan and was saying that is the trajectory of where the U.S. is going, because Japan, what they did, they started money printing with quantitative easing, which I'll later talk about what the hell that even is. But essentially, he was saying Japan started printing money endlessly, and when you do that, inflation gets out of control. The value of their currency goes down, right? Well, what I have pulled up here is the Japan inflation rate overlaid with the Japan money supply. And the money supply is what is increasing. So instead of money printing, the central banks actually just increase the money supply. So not all of them are physical, pieces of paper that they just print. No, this is created through lending. I'll talk about the complexities of that. But as you can see here, there's not a direct correlation throughout the years between the two, like as much as the inflationistas like to say.
Right. I just wanted to
United
jump
Kingdom.
in. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I just shared the interview where both you and John Sneisen were there and kind of went, not head to head. It's not like it wasn't a battle, but there was a lot of truth told there. So it's a good one.
Yeah, I wish I watched it again. I thought to myself, man, I kind of let him, talk more and reveal more, because I could have said a lot, but I wanted him to say it and not me just. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it, and we came out, not hating each other. That's not the point, right? And I don't believe in debates. I think debates are rigged. But yeah, it's another example is the United Kingdom. Here their money supply is increasing, but then their inflation rate is going down in some years. So yeah, it's not like this simple black and white explanation like they often have, even here in the U.S. So M2 money supply, I mean, that's money in bank accounts and circulating around the economy. So it's a good measure of the money supply. Now, another thing that because they often talk about the petrodollar, right, where the dollar went off the gold standard, and now it's it's backing oil trading around the world. Well, let's first go back into why that happened. Um, Back in the 19th century, during the 70s, we had the Arab oil embargo, which in short was just extreme political instability. And basically, oil just shot up in price, so high. I don't know if you guys were alive back then, but a lot of my relatives, I remember hearing them talk about how high gas prices were at the pump. So the US actually, they stepped in to lower the price of oil. That was the main objective. But they also saw an opportunity in this. And this kind of furthered the US being baked into the world system after World War II. This was like one of the last last things to really push that further. And we'll talk about things even past this that bakes into the system even more. But essentially, they had an agreement, um, the Saudis and the U.S. And basically, the agreement was, yeah, we're going to trade oil into dollars now. All that value is going to be related in dollars, um, and that significantly reduced the price of oil. But it was a net benefit for us, the U.S., because energy runs the world. As much as people will say, yeah, we can have free energy and 0 point energy, all this kind of stuff. Look, I know the guy in 0 point energy. He lives not too far from me. We're good friends. Let me tell you, a few of his business partners in the past, they're not around anymore. So that kind of stuff, I mean, if it's not obvious, it's going to be stifled. We're not going to have free energy from Tesla Tech or whatever implemented by Trump. Okay, we need to get out of the hope and cope. So with all that in consideration, the world runs on energy. Now think of it like this: the dollar, or I'm sorry, the gold. There's only so much of it in the world, and only so much of it can be dug out of the ground per year. And there's only so much supply and demand for it. It's not a utility. Whereas oil, I mean, when I say it runs the world, I mean it's allowing you to get the things from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer had to use oil to. So you can see where I'm going. Yeah. So when the dollar is backing oil trade, that actually makes the dollar even vaster and stronger, contrary to the belief of the movement. Okay. Now, why? Why? Because a lot of people say that this relationship is going to end, and I don't know if you guys remember, but last year there was this fake news that this agreement ended between the U.S. and Saudis. Now, technically, there isn't an official agreement. The news was telling you the agreement ended on this specific day in July. I think it was July 31st, something 2024. Well, if you actually look into it, there was no agreement. It was so there's no contract like these people are saying, like, oh, it expired. And even mainstream was repeating this nonsense. So both the alternative and mainstream were saying, the agreement between these two countries ended, blah, blah. Wasn't further. I mean, that was so false. And still, the dollar's, oil is still being traded in the dollar. BRICS bucks never happened. We talk about BRICS in depth, so I won't repeat too much. But
Yeah, BRICS and the tariffs.
But yeah, I mean, these guys, the doomers were saying, yeah, oil's gonna be traded in the Russian ruble or the Chinese yuan now, since this contract ended. Well,
In the Financial Times, no less, eh?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Not only is China a smaller economy, but also they have a low trust society. Okay, very. They lack transparency more so than the West, especially in their financials. So this is a prime example. Last year, they actually stopped reporting youth unemployment because it got so high. It was close to 25% before they started cutting off that economic indicator that would come out each month.
Shoot.
So this example, I mean, why the hell would you trust the Chinese yuan, especially when they, I mean, gosh, you want to talk about manipulation. As much as people like to say the dollar or the U.S. debt to equity ratio is high. Well, in China's even higher. I mean, their dollar or their currency is blown up by 300%. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And lack of transparency is the biggest factor of why countries around the world do not trust China when it comes to, monetary things. Okay. Now, another thing is who's writing the check? And what I mean by this, okay, look, we're spending about almost $1 trillion. 1.3 trillion per year in NATO defense spending, the US, while the rest of the world is, tiny amount. So we are writing the checks around the world, because think of it like this. Now, I've mentioned before on your show, Beth, that another element of why the US dollar is so dominant is because of the military that we have. Now, I think because some people picture, it's because we have nukes, or whatever. It's not necessarily that. It's because our Navy is the largest Navy willing to patrol the oceans and facilitate trade. Because the way the supply chains are ever since World War II, and we talked about how this is kind of coming to an end slowly. It'll take a while, but basically, free trade as we know it now for a while, supply chains were all around the world, right? So you have these complex supply chains. So the only way that can be facilitated and at low cost is if you have a Navy protecting that trade. You're protecting it from groups like the Houthis, for example, pirates. So if the Navy wasn't there, the United States Navy wasn't there, no one else would be able to fill that role, because yes, China technically has more ships, but they're tiny ships and they don't have very big range, so they can't go very far. Whereas we have, vast Navy of large ships. I mean, we have I think 8 or 9 aircraft carriers. China only has one, which barely even works. That's an old Russian one that they bought. Meanwhile, we have 8 of those just patrolling the world, and then other ships too. So yeah, that is why things got so cheap over the years for manufacturing and that kind of stuff. Because if the Navy wasn't there facilitating this, think of the insurance premiums on freight ships; they'd be so much higher because the pirates interfering, stuff like that. So that's another huge part of the dollar dominance. Now, another part of the dollar dominance is the SWIFT system, which we'll talk about. But basically, remember how Russia got all these sanctions recently, the last couple of years, because everything going on there. They were basically kicked out of the World Trade System. And the doomers were saying, "Oh my God, this is the best thing ever. They're going to come out of BRICS now and take over." Well, the BRICS buck never came to be. That turned out to be fake. I did a whole presentation with you on that, I do believe, as well as my channel. So I won't repeat myself too much about BRICS.
Yep.
But now with everything happening now in Ukraine, now we're talking about a peace deal, right? And it all relates back to money. Because Russia, now they're requesting access back into the international banking system after they're kicked out of it. Meanwhile, the doomers were telling you that they were going to take over this banking. I mean, gosh, I mean, what a mind F. So, yeah, that's interesting. We'll have to see what happens with that.
Yeah, you can swear, by the way. That's one of my favorite expressions.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I try to use it sparingly. But
I forget that you swore earlier.
Here's the interview about debunking the BRICS LARP, by the way. So, yeah, we've been through all these subjects. Yeah, you can go back in detail.
Yeah.
Here. Yeah.
So now, with that said, I want to give you guys that context just on the world level before we get into the dollar itself. Just so you get more macro view before we get more micro. But let me stop sharing here, and I'll just talk about how it gets created. Yeah, perfect. You did it for me. Okay. So yeah, the doomers claim the dollar has no value, right? But they ignore the fact that millions of market participants worldwide use it every day. And they choose to use it every day, right? I mean, they have choices. You could use almost any currency, really, with the foreign exchange market. But why do they choose the dollar? That's the question you'd be asking. Not why does it have value or not. Their entire financial identities, these doomers, revolve around the very system they claim to reject, right? Kind of like the outlaw people. But anyways, they obsess over the worthlessness of dollars while measuring their own wealth in them as well. So there's a lot of contradictions here, and I think a lot of people watching this may even I don't want to say accidentally, but probably fall into this just because they consumed a lot of this stuff over the past few years. Now, money in our modern economy is primarily created through the banking system in two ways. Now, the first is central bank operations. So, the Federal Reserve simply just doesn't print money. It's through monetary policy. So, something called open market operations, where they're basically buying or selling government securities. And they're setting interest rates for bank borrowing, making money more expensive to borrow or cheaper to borrow. And then they're also adjusting reserve requirements. So I'll talk about all those elements. The commercial bank lending, that's the primary function of how money is created. The majority of our money supply is actually created through commercial banks making loans. So when a bank issues a loan, it creates a deposit in the borrower's account and a corresponding asset, the loan, because the loan is an asset to the bank because they're making a return on that, right? On its books. And so that's how the new money enters. It's not physical piles of cash coming in like we often picture. So now also the doomers compare the money printing to Weimar Germany, right? Where I don't know if you guys remember, but Weimar Germany, 1930s, where they did print money literally, and it got out of control because, yeah, obviously that's going to inflate things.
Right.
Independent,
So if that was happening, that is exactly what it would create, but that's just not happening.
right? Because Weimar, comparing it to Weimar to what's happening today, I mean, so different. And I'll kind of fill in on the differences. First of all, you didn't have the independent central bank governance with inflation mandates like we do today. That's really the primary function of the Fed is inflation mandates, really. Now, the in Germany at that time, they didn't have the transparency requirements and congressional oversight because the Fed, they're really, yes, they are an independent agency, but it's created through a bill that was passed through Congress, right? So technically, Congress controls the Fed. So when the government wants to borrow more money, that's actually outside the Fed's control. That has nothing to do with Jerome Powell. So I mean, people lack a knowledge of political science, and unfortunately, when you don't have that, you're going to fall for these traps, thinking that the Fed is basically Weimar. Another thing is the the Weimar hyperinflation. It occurred when war reparations were only payable in foreign currencies. They couldn't use their currencies. They had to pay off everyone else in the other. So yeah, and at that time, their currency was really debased. It's everything going on. The country itself, it had destroyed productive capacity after World War One. That's the context of that time. So you had all that going on, right? All that madness at that time. The family war, like Clinton likes to say, World War One. So I mean, to compare that to today, I mean, it's just not even a fair comparison. Today, the Federal Reserve, they operate within a system that makes the Weimar style hyperinflation just extremely unlikely because I showed you the dollar stability and then the world reserve currency role that it has, and in the money creation, it's tied to productive economic activity, which I showed. Basically, you can measure through GDP, right? And yeah, I mean, to say that is the same as it was back then, in Germany. Completely different. Now, another thing is because I want to talk about more about uh, how the Fed uh, increases the money supply and decreases it. Like I said, not money printing. So there are two things called quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. I've mentioned them briefly in our past shows, but I want to kind of get in more of the nitty gritty of it for you guys on this time. So I'll first get into quantitative easing because remember the doomers say, well, because Japan started doing this thing called quantitative easing, this renders all economies doing the same thing. It's going to experience a doomsday because it's gonna get out of control. Well, what the hell is quantitative easing? Because it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but do people actually know what it is? Well, QE is when the Federal Reserve purchases long-term securities, and that is just government bonds. So they're basically buying bonds from themselves, the government, right? Can you see how that's rigged? Yeah, so QE is when the Federal Reserve buys these bonds to increase the money supply. And then that encourages lending and investment. So here's how it actually works. The Fed buys the government bonds from banks and financial institutions, and that puts reserves into the banking system. And so then the banks gain liquidity, which can potentially increase lending to businesses and consumers when that happens, right? So that is how the money supply is increased.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay.
Yeah, so QE is essentially just a tool, but they have another tool called QT, and both of these tools are used to control the economy. It goes back to that pyramid diagram I was showing you. But basically, when they're doing QT, it makes it lowers longer term interest rates. So I'm gonna make less on the bonds during times of that. Whereas right now we're in QT, so technically you're getting a high rate on bonds, right? Everyone's talking about, oh my god, I can get 4 or 5% on a bond. Well, that's because they're doing QT. When it's QE, it's a lot lower, right? You're gonna get what, 1% or 2% at best. So,
And the T is what again? The QT?
quantitative tightening.
Tightening. Thank you.
Or QT, QE and QT, it's the same thing. I know it can get a little confusing, all these terms, but we had to become familiar with this language because finance is another language, right?
For sure. So there's the two: quantitative easing, and quantitative tightening.
Yes, very good. Okay, so QE, quantitative easing, this is fundamentally different from money printing because it's a temporary measure. Okay, it's not like perpetual. Like the doomers will have you think that QE is perpetual. They're constantly increasing the money supply. But I just showed you earlier that's not the case. And if you actually look right now, the money supply has been decreasing over the last couple of years, and that happens when interest rates go up, right? Which we are in high interest rate technically environment. So it's a temporary measure. QE. It's not a perpetual thing.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
So when the money supply diminishes, where is it going? Where is the loss? Because are we not in a closed system, or it's not like that?
Well, I'll explain that, but
Okay.
I kind of want to first explain QE a little bit more.
Sounds good.
So yeah, it's conducted through market operations, not direct government financing. So the QT, I think this will help answer your question, Beth. The QT, the quantitative tightening, this is essentially the reverse process of what I just talked about. So the Fed allows bonds on its balance sheet to mature, and then they don't buy more of those bonds. So that is how the money supply decreases, because they might even actively sell the bonds that they have on their balance sheet. So that reduces the money supply in the bank reserves in conjunction. And when that happens, interest rates tend to rise as a result, because now money becomes more expensive to borrow. It's more scarce now. Economic activity typically slows as borrowing becomes more expensive, right? So the critical point is that QE and QT, they're tools that are used to maintain control of the economy. Now, the Fed is going to tell you, well, we do it to maintain price stability and maximum employment, right? That's their PR. But yeah, it's not to arbitrarily create or destroy money, right? It's not just simply black and white like that, like the Zoomers are talking about. And the Fed, they make these decisions just based off of economic data, which my group we do look at because it's quite important to know. But yeah, they're so with all that said, comparing this to Weimar hyperinflation, they miss the context of what's going on now compared to the 1920s in Germany. Because back then, they didn't not only did they not have a central bank, but they didn't have these tools I'm talking about back then.
Mhm. Did you also want to quickly say about your group? Because I did put in the notes a link to your trading course.
Yeah.
I'm in that course. I'm in the back row sucking my thumb. You don't know it.
Yeah.
I'm not showing up to live classes yet,
Yeah, I
but
snuck you in there.
recordings. Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that very much. And I do have a link to that course if anybody would like to check it out and use it. I'll say, just for full disclosure, it is an affiliate link. It's the first time you and I have had an affiliate relationship
Yeah.
of any kind, this
Yep.
direction. And so I do recommend it. Brandon is a good teacher. You've developed a lot. I didn't want to listen to one of your classes, but your
Yeah.
teaching style kept me going in
Good.
the subject. Yeah. So
And yeah, it's not a standalone course where you just buy this course and probably not likely use it. That just happens to most courses, unfortunately. This is actually a group boot camp. So we're learning together a lot. There's only 8 lessons. So we're going through 8 weeks of lessons together. So it's not like you're just now you technically could, because there is the course material you could go to if you did want to do it on your own. But yeah, I've seen so much more success when it's a group. So I'll kind of talk about that later, the training group, what we all do.
sure.
I'll show you some results we've gotten even. But yeah, you're in there. I got Chance in there from Interverse.
Oh,
So
nice. Good
yeah,
for you.
it's
Yeah, all my
I'm
friends
really
are in
excited.
there.
Our next group is gonna be pretty lively.
Fantastic. Every time I go in the forum, everybody's like, "Oh, hey, Beth, how's it going?" So all my friends are there.
Oh, good. Yeah, we have a lot of your people in there.
Mm.
Yeah, and like you said about the your group, your group of best friends. That's essentially what's turned in for me. It's like, oh my gosh, all these people that want to talk about the same thing I do. And not be victims of, and push these narratives like the doomers will. Um,
Exactly.
Now I kind of want to, because I talked the technicalities of these monetary tools. I kind of want to give you a visual because I myself am a visual person. So hopefully this will help. Now imagine the economy as a bathtub, and the water level represents liquidity in the financial system. And liquidity just means the ease of turning the asset into cash. Essentially, that's the quick definition. So during economic downturns, the bathtub is draining, credit is tightening, right? The Fed uses QE to add water back to the tub by purchasing bonds. This doesn't create new water out of nothing. It exchanges one asset, bonds, for another, reserves. So the Fed holds these bonds on its balance sheet as assets. So think of it like this: the Fed isn't creating money from thin air and giving it away like Weimar, where they literally had wheelbarrows of it. No, instead it's trading. So it's trading reserves for existing assets at market prices. So the Fed now owns those bonds and can sell them later. Um, so that's what's going on there. Now let's see what's been happening since 2022. Well, the Fed has stopped refilling the tub, so they stopped replacing the maturing bonds, and the Fed actively removes some water, so they sell bonds back to the market, and the water levels gradually decreases, so liquidity tightens, and now the balance sheet shrinks. Um, so yeah, hopefully that that helps break the money printing narrative.
Good metaphor and perfectly clear, and always so much simpler. Because the truth movement has gone for, oh, what's the secret hidden thing and the
Right.
complex, and oh my goodness,
Oh
I
my
was thinking
God.
about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that reminds me of like a influencer in particular, George Gammon, I think his name. He's one of these like anarcho-capitalist types, which I don't hate on, but like anyways, he has like these whiteboard presentations of all, the financial plumbing of all, the Fed. And all. Look, you're missing the big picture. You're you're over explaining what is quite simple, like you said.
It's like the law. They're always looking for the secret hidden thing that
Yep.
nobody knows and they won't tell you, but you get a wink from a judge or a cashier or whatever. And then you think like you're really onto it and must be
Right.
this secret thing. And
Oh my gosh, it's so true.
yeah,
And now that everyone has access to a camera and a mic, now everyone's an economist.
right.
um, so let me show you actually real quick because I want to show you the Fed balance sheet and its reduction real quick.
Okay.
Let me try to find that. 1 second. Um,
Do you want me to
yeah,
copy
it's funny.
right, and share fresh or no? You got it.
No, there's one more thing actually. Yeah, I wanted to show the M2 money supply for US. Okay. Or no, the balance sheet, yeah.
Your presentations are getting snappier. I like them.
Oh, thanks, yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Brendan's also a good artist, by the way.
yeah, I don't know if you guys know that, but yeah, I'm a painter. I draw. I do everything from realism. So I like figure drawing a lot. I love drawing the human body, especially the female body. I might have a little bias there. um, but I also I come up with my conceptual ideas. So it's not, so yeah, it's fun. Like I said, I'm a very visual person.
Nice. I loved figure drawing. It was the best. And you had
Yeah,
live
yeah,
model.
I do it every week. It's gosh, it's my favorite favorite day of the week
Fun.
besides my mentoring meetings with my group.
Mm.
Um, okay, yeah. So here we go. So yes, this is when the Fed started increasing their balance sheet right after the scamdemic, and then notice this: it almost retraced everything that they did. So I mean, gosh, I mean this doesn't break the narrative for you. I don't know what will. Um, so so I mean, we could talk about inflation next, um, but yeah, if you're not aware of these monetary system mechanics, because the doomers will never bring these things up, right? They're going to repeat the same thing that you've heard. They're one trick ponies essentially. It's just like, oh, God, again, I'm hearing this narrative again, and throughout all these years, like Rich Dad Poor Dad saying buy silver, even though it's stayed the same price since the 1970s. I mean, people really have to learn how to do their own due diligence. Now I can show you mine, but I mean, yeah, it's quite scary, and it goes back to the financial literacy problem that we have here.
This is gold and silver, by the way. What you're showing
No,
us? No.
no.
Okay.
This is now this is this is the measurement in inflation that the government relies or shows us, right? The CPI, Consumer Price Index. Now, obviously, it went high back in the early 2020s, close to 10% across board. Now, some people, we talked about this a little bit, Beth, but like some people are like, well, this is not accurate because, my grocery bill is triple than it was, what, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. Look, inflation, there's anecdotal inflation measure where that's just your own personal experience. And then you got to think bigger picture. So food prices have gone up quite a bit, yes. But if you think about it, you're paying less at the pump now than you were back then. So you have to kind of look at it. Now, I don't believe that inflation is as low as 3% in reality. But at the same time, you have to realize with this data, it is impacting the world. You can't fight the reality because this is impacting monetary, or I should say monetary decisions, like talking about QT and QE, the tools that they're using. that is influencing this. Okay. So if you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. It's still there. It's going to influence your life.
Yeah, if you believe it or not, right? This is a very important point. Reality doesn't mind if you don't believe in it. It's still there.
And the point is, now the Fed, when they see this going higher than 2%, they're typically going to do the quantitative tightening. Okay, so they're going to make lending more expensive, right? Interest rates more expensive. Now they've been telling us for 4 years that we're not going to go to a low rate environment until it's closer to 2% inflation right here. So we're not there yet. So some people were saying, oh, it's gonna, rates are gonna go back to 2020 levels pretty soon. Markets were getting excited about that, and I was saying, no, that is not going to happen. Like I said, the Fed is as public as it gets. They're telling you what they're going to do in the next coming months. So as much as you want to bury your head in the sand on how inflation is measured and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't matter, because if you have a business, or for that matter, if you're a consumer, you're still going to be impacted by this stuff.
Right. And I just wanted to backtrack a little bit, because there was a point where you demonstrated how we were actually in a deflationary period. I know that was already some years ago. So that's obviously switched.
No. Because look, this is deflation right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
another example is gas. Gas was almost $5 a gallon. Now it's down to less than $3, almost two something here.
Yeah, we almost got $2 a liter. That was our peak, and now we're about $1.50, which is high. But yeah, I was going to ask about gas prices.
In the States, it's made quite a bigger move down.
Right on.
But yeah, that's a great example of deflation right there. So yes, I know food got more expensive, but it's because of we'll kind of talk about this later, but it's because of the bullshit narratives that people buy, and then corporations use that to their advantage to charge you more.
This is it. Everyone believes in inflation, and then we'll put up with this crap.
They make it real, and they make it worse. And now with tariffs, everyone believes that's real. So now companies have another excuse to raise their prices even more. Okay.
Exactly.
Now think about this: that when companies do that, they're going to make more profit, obviously. So with all that said, I'm like, you better start learning how to profit from the companies in the market that are doing this to you, if you want to come out of it, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because otherwise, people are getting buried alive.
And this leads me to my next point. This is showing you how many hours it takes of the U.S. average wage to buy one share of the stock market. Okay, so the average wage, I believe, is around 30 an hour. Yeah, here in the U.S. Now that's different than minimum wage. Minimum wage is still $7 here, which is terrible, $7 an hour. But yeah, on average, across all salaries, we're looking at $30 an hour. People are making in the U.S. on average. So you're gonna have to work 188 hours essentially to buy one share of the S&P 500. So this is showing you, because remember, this goes back to the idea of money people have, that it equates their labor. Well, this is showing you that is just not feasible anymore.
And so when you say not feasible, like it just that the idea isn't real or doesn't work, but
no, I should say it doesn't work. It's just if you want to be able to live comfortably or retire, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the way things are going, the days of saving, all that kind of stuff, it's far from over. You have to be you're going to have to become savvy to these kind of things if you want to get ahead. Because unfortunately, I mean, this chart hopefully paints the picture for you, but the idea that you can work your way to riches, or you can save your way to riches, it's just not sustainable long term. And this is showing you that the asset, the class that owns assets, and the S&P is an asset, they're going to come out ahead. Whereas if you don't have assets, you're going to get wiped out.
Right, right. I was just considering how we've come from me personally, and I know a lot of people came from a stock where they had the ideal, the belief that if they just worked harder, they would get ahead. And we're
Yeah,
not there anymore, right? So our work ethic, it can be fantastic, but shout out to someone in my world right now. I won't use their name,
yeah,
but they're just working their ass off all day,
mm,
every day, putting out content and being there for people, and that's not generating, right? The work itself is not doing it. I'm not saying they're maybe qualifying for where you're at either, but
yeah.
it's yeah, that we have to drop that mindset, I think. Neither should you not work or not produce, right? It's not about
Right.
that. Yeah.
Um, Now another thing before we move on, um, there's a few more points I want to talk about the foreign exchange market and the dollar. Another thing I haven't mentioned on your show before is that something called the network effect of the dollar. Um, so the dollar, let me go back to the dollar index actually. Yeah, so the dollar is involved in roughly 88% of all foreign exchange transactions globally on a daily basis. So basically, this is a self-reinforcing cycle where the dollar is used as the main currency around the world for trade. Um, and it's the deepest, most liquid market in the world, right? And we talked about that before. Someone exhausts that point. Now another point that helps strengthen that is the Swift system, which I mentioned a little bit a few minutes ago. But the Swift system, uh, it's the uh, it's the global system that allows you to make a wire from your bank to someone else's bank account, essentially. I mean, and what of course is going to be used in that majority of the time? Well, dollars, of course. So, I mean, with all these elements in place, uh, on top of the geopolitical factors I've talked about, all that kind of stuff. The inner, the doomers, and they're it's kind of funny because a lot of them call themselves free market thinkers, right? um, but what they don't want to admit is how the free market actually works. So,
Right.
so anyways, yeah. So the
What's
network
the
effect. Oh, good.
I guess the motive, is it pretty clear, like for the doomers that are pushing that, and then maybe they're selling a solution for operating within that context? Is there any other deeper motive for that going on? Is there, because so many things. One of my awakenings recently is that the mainstream medicine is trying to kill us. We already knew that. We didn't
Yeah.
know that natural medicine is also trying to kill us by design, that it
Yes.
was invented by the same Rockefellers,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It goes back to that financial nihilism.
yeah,
I think that was another creation of the controllers.
right.
Because yeah, I mean, basically they've given you coping mechanisms. So rather than talking about this, what you're seeing right now here on the screen, they're going to talk about why they're so evil and why they're so wrong, why you're right? And it's um, it now more than ever, I would say people don't understand how money actually works. Because now you have all these things like crypto that have come into play. And not only crypto, but markets have become really perverted. Um, where now it's essentially just people view it as gambling, as like for like fun now. Um, and this has become a movement inside this financial nihilism. So in the meme stock uh, community, which I definitely don't think is organic at all, because I know how hedge funds could use this to manipulate the public and take the other side of the trade and use them as liquidity. So that is the point of all of this, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm.
Um, now the Doomers, of course, they're always going to talk about the next black swan, right? That's coming. And I'm not disregarding. There's never a 0% chance of a black swan occurring. Look, it's certainly within the realm of mathematical possibility. You have to factor that in when we're talking about money here. And a black swan is a 3 standard deviation event, so it's going to happen. It's inevitable. Now, they like to call everything a black swan, right? But you have to remember, a black swan is an unexpected event that renders risk models useless. So back to the example, as much as the financial nihilists will say, Bitcoin or gold will save you in these events, go back in any of those charts and you'll see when the black swans happen, those things go down.
Just like everything.
It's the same with any other asset class. So you got to break that narrative that those things are hedges, right? And that leads me into, okay, well, what is an actual hedge? And that falls into the realm of, my work. Yeah, I really, I really like this quote because it kind of relates back to what you're just asking me about, Beth. But yeah, while the bulls and bears argue over who will be right next, I'd rather be directionally agnostic and use both as liquidity when the headlines come out. Now, another one I really like this one too. There is only one side of the market, and it is not the bull side or the bear side, but the right side.
Nice. And is bull and bear just like red and blue and left and right and all that? There you go.
Yeah, it's kind of like I kind of described some of the doomers earlier as like inflationistas, where they're obsessed with inflation. Now you have other types of doomers that are deflationistas, so they think deflation is always coming, no matter what business cycle we're in or whatever. So it's kind of like that. The bulls or the bears. A perfect example of a bear would be, Robert Kiyosaki, the rich dad. He's like a perma bear, what I call it, or Gerald Celente, something like that. A perma bull would be, someone like Jim Cramer, who is always talking about how great markets are and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And then just with those terms, the bull market is when values are going up, and the bear market is when they're receding. Where are we at right now? How would you describe this market?
I'll show you. That's my next slide.
Your next slide.
You read my mind.
Okay.
Right now, we're still technically in a bull market. Now, there are some technicalities what constitutes a bull and bear market. I won't get into that too much today. It might bore you guys. That's something I talk about in my course, though, because it is good to know if you are involved in markets. But technically, we're not. We're still in a bull market because it's still above. It's still above a certain level. But a bear market is when an asset drops 20% below its recent high. So actually, I didn't share in this presentation, but Bitcoin is actually past the 20% drop from its most recent high. So technically, Bitcoin is in a bear market right now. But that's its own thing. Now, across the stock market, which is going to impact people more, just because everyone's retirements and all that is related to that, right? The stock market, which I have pulled up here, the S&P, which is like the main index of it, that is in a 10% drawdown. So that is a correction territory, technically, not a crash. A crash is usually close to a 20% drop. So we're not there yet. We're just in correction mode. But I mean, from 2024, we're still higher because it's significantly. And then you have to imagine that there are certain stocks within the market, right, that are doing much better than even this, right, and some that are doing worse.
Right. So it's an average of the whole S&P, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. I would say, yes, though we are in a bull market. It is still uncertain for a lot of investors. They're feeling the fear, and the fear index has gone up again. I forgot to share it in this presentation. I showed you guys that last time, I think. But yeah, so now everyone's kind of in panic mode again, all of a sudden, even though, we're still technically in a bull market.
What's that being driven by, the panic market?
Well, it's the uncertainty of tariffs. Everyone's freaking out because they keep seeing this new headline every day talking about.
Right. Yeah, I'll share that link. The tariffs is bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is also pricing in something I talked about last year. I don't know if you guys follow me or not, but last year on my YouTube back in August, I was saying, yes, the markets are going to do well in 2024 until the end of the year. We're going to be well into a bull market. However, next year, the returns in the market are not going to be so great, just based on what I was seeing back then. That was 6 months ago. And that's stuff that we track in the group. And now we're starting to see the fruition of that presentation. I told them, look, don't make decisions just from this today. Realize this is coming down the road. And now we're starting to see that come to fruition. So there's multiple factors on why the market's dropping now. Tariffs is one of them. It's not the main one, though. The main one is it has to relate to the Fed and their monetary policy, what traders think is going to happen with that. And then also where, in relation to that, now underneath that is where they think GDP is going. So GDP has been going lower a little bit, and the S&P is basically pricing that in right now.
What does that mean, pricing that in?
So it's selling off a little bit in the context of all of those things.
Okay, got it. So that's what people who are afraid do sell, right?
Yeah.
Or
short.
Or short. Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so what is a hedge? Because I think it's important because in times like this, you don't want to be a sucker, right? You don't want to be long only, is what I call, where you're buying lower and hoping to sell higher at a later price. Like that's the main idea of investing for most people, right? Whether it's the stock market or any asset, really, for that matter. But in times like this, where there's a lot of panic and fear, if you're not hedged, and we experience like a 10% drawdown, like what I'm showing right now on a broad level, if you're long only, you're going to be impacted by that. Whereas if you're directly agnostic, you can make money from this happening. Or the opposite, if the markets go up, you're still going to make money. That's kind of the whole point. But with a hedge is an investment or trade made to reduce the risk of an adverse price movement in an asset. So a lot of people, we're talking about money and the psychology that, people like to save rather than invest because they see investing as scary because of times like this, right? Even with all that said, I mean, if you do zoom out, look, you're going to see that it does consistently go up over time. But I do understand the fear that people have, because I myself, I am a big proponent of hedges, not because of fear, but just because I want something called risk-adjusted returns, which is basically, I want to calculate, okay, there is analyzed risk every year you're in an asset that they're going to drop just because of a black swan event, a possibility of it happening. And usually when that happens, assets can drop, as far as 20% or more in value. So with all that in consideration, in the world of possibilities, having a hedge on can actually reduce your loss on that asset, and you can make money on it. And that goes into directly agnostic, or this got me interested in trading, actually, because we're talking about, okay, we're basically wallets, right? Walking wallets. And we're being manipulated by the corporations, raising prices artificially, really, on things. So with, we don't want to discount the reality of the system. The system is there, is impacting us. We don't want to be in denial of it. However, my desire was to have flexibility my whole life, essentially, because my background, I had a troubled childhood, very chaotic. A lot of things were outside my control, especially as a child. And it molded me into someone who really appreciates not necessarily control. I'm not interested in gaining control. It's more flexibility.
Control is good, Brandon. To control what you can't control. That's one of the psyops of the New Age healing movement, is to let control go. It's the biggest BS ever. It really is, because you have
Yeah,
control.
yeah.
God already gave you that.
Right. Well, what I meant by that is, look, I can't control what the Fed is going to do.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah, which is true and good to know. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
but with all these fluctuations and these things I'm showing you, um, well, through markets, I can become more flexible and agile to these sorts of things. So that's what got me interested in trading. And then the deeper I got into it, I realized the what why do they call it hedge fund, right? Why? Because they're hedged. They're taking trades on both sides of the trade, right? So once I discovered this, um, then that really took that level of flexibility even further, and I started to realize, wow, this goes beyond even just moving past the paradigm of being asset poor or rich, or simply just stock trading or something. Like, this is going further than that. And this is essentially how the elites are going to make money no matter what happens in the world, right? So that's why you're going to see these black swan events come into play always, because of this playbook.
Nice.
So that's kind of the portfolio management side of it, of being directly agnostic. You can get around being, you can essentially become immune to black swans and uncertainty with that approach. But another thing is to structure it through financial instruments. So what's interesting that when I started being mentored by some of these hedge fund guys, I learned, I knew what options and futures were just vaguely. But I was taught when I was trying to do trade on my own, I was told through online gurus and YouTube videos that everyone looks at, that you have to day trade in order to make money from markets. Like, that's what you do. That's the thing, right? So I did that, and I lost a lot of money, because think about it like this. So day trading, you're trying to make money from small moves in the market, like, within seconds or minutes. You're
Is
buying
it
and then getting out.
is it more like gambling?
Yeah, I was just getting related to gambling because, oops, I think I skipped that. Yeah, another presentation. Um, the statistics are there. The statistics are 90% of day traders are going to lose 90% of their money within 90 days. I mean, anyone that's tried to do it long term knows that's true. And I certainly lost money on it when I was young and dumb. But yeah, it's a gambling, because you're trying to make money on, like, within minutes or seconds moves, right? And because it doesn't work, it's because of this. Now, let's imagine the stock market. This is the reality. And then I'll have you imagine something. The reality is the stock market, the S&P, like I showed you earlier, on a daily average, it only moves 0.03% on average, up or down. So let me get this straight. As a day trader, you're trying to catch that small of a movement, trying to make that much of a gain, but you're willing to lose 100% to make 0.03%. I mean, that doesn't make sense.
No. No. Good point.
And that's what happens. When you buy a stock, a stock can technically go to zero, right? That's the bottom floor, and there's always a chance of of the possibility of that happening, right? When you buy an individual stock. Now, what I found out was the elites in the hedge funds and the investment banks, they don't trade stocks. They don't day trade or anything like that even. They're trading these financial instruments, derivatives. Now, you hear a lot about derivatives from The Big Short. That's what they talk about, right?
Yeah, we had a good event in the House of Free Will where Brenton guessed it and talked us through this movie. It was fantastic.
Yeah, no, that was fun,
It was.
because we kind of busted through the Hollywood brainwashing in that movie. But yeah, they make it try to sound like, oh my god, it's this derivatives is like this sophisticated thing that's only for the elites, and we'll try to explain it to you, but you're not gonna be able to understand it. That was the takeaway. Now, this movie was all about Michael Burry, who, yes, he got a good return by shorting the housing market, essentially, back in 2007, 2008. What they don't tell you is he almost went bankrupt he almost lost his investors all their money. He was 1 month away from losing because he was betting. I mean, he wasn't diversified in his portfolio, and he was going all in betting against the housing market on these mortgage-backed securities, which is a derivative instrument, a financial instrument. So he was willing to risk 100%, essentially, going all in on this thing. And the one time he was right is when he hit it big, right? And that's what the movie's about. But Michael Burry's kind of a one-trick pony, where his reputation is like, oh, I'm a contrarian short seller. Like when everyone thinks the market's going up, I'm going to short it. Essentially, that's his one-trick play. So it worked out for him in 2008. Fantastic. And they talked about MBSs and derivatives, like, oh my gosh, it's this complex thing. What they don't tell you is that there's these other derivatives, because the mortgage-backed securities you're not going to be able to access unless you have very high net worth and connections to investment banks, which Michael Burry did at that time. Another set of financial instruments that I think is even more useful and more of a utility, rather than just investing in an asset like a stock or even real estate, because I think investing in real estate is kind of a scam. Because think about it like this: when you invest in real estate, right, you don't truly own that house, and most of the time you're getting financing, you're getting a loan, a mortgage. If you actually look at amortization and how interest rates work, over that 30-year mortgage period, you're actually paying more in interest. So the average U.S. home is $500,000, and if you're borrowing at 6%, which is the interest rate right now, you're essentially paying $580,000 in interest. So you're paying more interest than that home is actually worth.
Ouch.
Yeah. So you don't own the home. Like, you have this equity in this box that you supposedly own, but even if you do pay it off, now you're still paying property taxes and all that kind of stuff. And as much as people say, like Alphonse, like, oh, I can get around that, we've shown you that you certainly can't. And even he paid his property taxes recently. So yeah, this misconception of ownership in real estate is such a scam. And then stock, I showed you the risk in that. You're going to be susceptible to black swans and 10% drawdowns, like what we've seen recently. Mm-hmm. Whereas financial instruments, when you have these layered on top of the long short portfolio strategy, which I talk about and implement in our group, this allows you even more flexibility on top of everything else I talked about, particularly options. So what is an option? I think we should talk about that first. Now, an option contract is actually a legal instrument. Rather, it's like a legal and financial instrument blended into one. It's a contract. Now, before it was introduced in the financial markets, Beth, if you found a house, let's say, for $1 million you really wanted to get, you didn't have the money for at the time, but you see that it's worth a lot, and you want to get it. You approach the owner and say, look, I see your property is, worth $1 million. I'll offer to buy it for $1 million. And this contract, this option contract, that we could potentially agree on, is me offering to buy your property at $1 million a year from now at that same price. And you can't sell it to anyone else if you sign this agreement. And I'll pay you $10,000 just to agree to this. So he does agree to it. He signs up. Great. Now we have an option contract. So now if he decides to not do it, then the contract expires a year later from now. And the contract is just worthless. But if the seller agrees to it, the contract is worth something. Now, there's a couple things you could do with the contract. I could go find 10 investors if I didn't have the $1 million, each with $100,000, and have them. I could find the capital that way, and then approach the owner with the $1 million. Or I could take that contract I bought for $10,000, and I could approach those same investors and say, look, I think this property is undervalued, and I think it's going to go up more. And I have the seller agree to sell it to us at this price, even if the market changes, right? If the property becomes more valuable, we can still get it at this price. So I can actually sell the contract itself rather than buying the property. So option contracts, they not only relate to the legal realm, but also financial markets now. And this was really created as a hedging tool for investment bankers, but then it turned into its own trading, which is fascinating. So technically, you can use an option contract to do the same thing, the same illustration I showed with the real estate, but you can replace that with a stock now. So I agree to buy the stock at this set price where the market is valuing it right now. And if it moves up, my contracts go up in value, of course. And I can get that asset at that price I agreed at earlier. And that gap is now my profit. Now, as option traders, we're not looking to get the asset after the option expires. We're looking to sell the contracts for a higher price. So we're trading contracts essentially. We're not even trading stock itself, which is fascinating. Now, what are the advantages of this? Well, trading stocks without the risk. Like I said, stocks, they have an inherent 25 to 30% annualized risk just because when a black swan event happens, typically they're going to drop that much. A prime example of that, of course, is the scamdemic or the 2022 bear market, which we saw drop that same level. So it happens inevitably, right? Now, options, this is used in conjunction with our top-down approach. So we're going from macro to micro. So macro stuff from Fed decisions, stuff like that, government, all the way down to individual companies. So that trickle down effect I showed you earlier, we're using that to find trades. Once we do that, then we can use options to limit our risk reward. So what's cool about options is I know my max risk even before I buy the contract, but I also know how much how much it can make at its max win, is what they call it, max reward. So essentially, an option contract can go way above 100% increase in value, and that's really our goal. Because remember, you can lose 100%. Technically, a stock can go down to zero, right? That's inevitable. Well, not inevitable, but the risk is always there for the stock.
The risk is inevitable.
So,
right.
Yeah.
So the option contract would become worthless if the stock went to zero, obviously.
Depends.
Okay.
Now, if I was long, if I was bullish and I bought a call option, so that would be, I would buy a call option if I think the stock's gonna go up. If the stock doesn't go up, then my option contract will be worth less, right? I could sell it at a lower price and get out, cut my losses, but I won't lose more than 100%. So let's say I bought a contract for $100. I think the stock is going to go up to $120 a share over the next few months based on my studies, my quantitative studies. And if I'm right, I can see that if it does go up to 120, I can make X amount. So let's say I can make $300 versus the $100 I could lose if I'm completely wrong. Let's say the stock goes to 50. So now we can layer these together, these trades, in such a way that is in the directly agnostic approach. So now you have another type of option called the put option. So if I'm bearish on an asset or a company, based on my quantitative studies, which we do in the group, I can take the position through a put option. So let's say the stock's at $100. I think it's going to go down to 80. So, in regular stock, if I shorted a stock and the stock goes on the 80s, that $20 difference is my profit, just the $20. So I made 20% essentially, and I could have lost more than that. When you're short a stock, you have unlimited risk because stock can go to infinity technically. And that happens a lot. Like GameStop, it got short squeezes is what it's called, when shorts got squeezed out because so many people were buying it that they had to get out their position. So it makes the stock go even higher and insane moves, like 20, 50% sometimes. So if you're short that stock, you have a lot more risk. But with an option, you have limited downside. So even if I'm completely wrong, I'm not going to lose more than what I put in. But if I short a stock, I could easily lose more than I put in.
Right.
So yeah, you're willing to risk more than 100% to make 20% if you're shorting a stock, if it went from 100 to 80. Now, if a stock went down to 180 and I buy a put option, In this example, let's say I bought the put option for $100, goes down to 80, now it's worth 300. Well, now I just made a 300% return, whereas the stock I could have only made 20%. I'm willing to risk 100% of that.
Right, right. Well, thank you for explaining that. That's actually pretty, understandable. I like that.
Yeah.
We are starting to come a little bit down to our time. I really
Yes.
don't want to rush you, but just
Yeah.
to keep it in mind,
Oh yeah, no, we're
what
getting
you'd like
towards
to
the
cover.
end.
Yeah, okay.
Because I mean, I could talk all day about trading.
Mhm, for sure. And this is stuff that you teach in detail in your course, correct?
Yes. Now I
Yeah.
don't overwhelm you guys. I give you
Mhm.
all you need to know because I've looked at some of my competition, the trading education space, and oh my gosh, they overwhelm you with 50 million different modules. Like you got to
Right.
understand every little intricacy about the market. I really cut it down to the necessities, and my whole point is to cut out the noise because I need you guys and really for myself to be able to implement this fastly as possible. And I also created this because I see the problems that we talked about earlier with the way things are going with money. So everything that I didn't have when I first started trading, I I wanted to put in this trading business builders group that I created. Um, so I created this for everyday people. You don't have to be a high net worth person. You can work a full-time job, that kind of stuff. Yeah, but the point is you don't need a ton of capital. Typically I recommend if you are interested in trading, like the way I'm talking about, um, a minimum $1,000, which pretty low cost of barrier. Most trading gurus are going to tell you, oh, you need 25K or whatever. But with options, you really don't need that much capital.
Mhm.
And with the industry being so competitive, like I listed here, the barriers of entry have been removed. So it used to be different. Back if we tried to do this 30 years ago, options trading, it just wouldn't be a thing we could do on our own at home. You would have to be an institutional trader to take advantage of these things. But now anyone can do this as long as they have an internet connection. Now, another thing is we're not staring at screens for hours every morning like the day traders will have you do. Um, this is actually part-time effort. So if you're in my group, it's just an hour a week of learning, if not less. Sometimes it's less than that. When you're actually implementing the trading, like you're actually putting your money to work, it's going to be 2 to 3 hours a week. So that's less than a part-time job.
There you go. I shared the link again for anybody that's wanting to check it out. You can click on that or in the notes below as well.
Yeah, I mean, so this is kind of like the roadmap of what it looks like. But yeah, we're getting our macro to micro view. We're finding trade ideas within that. We're building the long short portfolio, the options, and we're just repeating the process, right?
Rinse and
So
repeat.
this can only take you 2 hours a week. Now a lot of people say, they picture trading like, oh my god, I gotta have like a gaming PC and like 50 different monitors. You don't need that. You could actually get away with, like a simple Acer laptop. You only need one screen. Now, I personally like to have at least two, but you don't need that, especially with our style of trading. Also, you open a brokerage account when anyone can do very easily. Now, I have a particular broker I recommend in my group. I don't have an affiliation with them. It's just the one I've used for years personally. And I've tried almost all of them. And so a lot of this stuff I've recommend. I don't have an affiliation with in the group, but it's just what I personally use, and I show you how I use it.
And that would be
Um,
different from country to country, obviously, right? That you would need a broker in your own jurisdiction or
yeah. So the one I recommend, it's available for everyone besides Canadians. But there are two brokers I recommend Canadians that have worked out well. But we actually, because I have people all around the world in my group. Now, smart money, no matter where they are, if they're a hedge fund or investment bank, they're going to trade the U.S. market because it's the most liquid. There's the most opportunities. I mean, there's literally thousands of companies and assets that you can trade in the U.S. market with the options and the risk reward optimization, right? And it's the most transparent economy, so you have all these data points, which is, I mean, gosh, when you know how to use it, it's a beautiful thing. but yeah, so my traders in Denmark or Spain, they're trading the U.S. market still, and they have access to it through the broker. So, I remember a couple years ago when I had consultations available. So I had this lady from Australia, like she was interested in this, but then she's like, "Well, I'm an accountant, and I just think that's gonna complicate taxes, right? Because I'm trading U.S. market, but I'm in Australia, and it's like I don't think you understand how this works. Because if you're using a broker that does business in your country, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to offer you that service. In the service, it's just literally having them give you access to trade these things. It's very cheap. But anyways, she was saying, "Oh, it's going to complicate my tax issues and all that." And I was trying to explain, like, look, since the broker's doing business in your country, you're not susceptible to U.S. taxes, that kind of stuff. You just pay your own country's tax rate on those things, and you can do it within a business entity, which talk about too, how to structure that for trading particularly. But yeah, anyone internationally can do this. It's not going to overcomplicate things. And lastly, all the financial information is public. However, you're going to get analysis paralysis, right? You're not going to know how to filter through it or look at it. So that's what I help people with. Because yeah, when we're talking about the markets, they are intricate, they are complex, and it's very easy to get the analysis paralysis because there's thousands of assets trading it every day, right? It is a roller coaster because it's going up and down, like I showed you earlier, and people are always getting faked out. Like after Trump won, everyone was like a perma bull all of a sudden, like, oh my god, markets are just going to endlessly go up, and then the opposite happened. So when the news is telling you to buy, the opposite is happening, right? So to avoid the roller coaster, that's what we're all about with the long short portfolio. So that's what I that's really the prerogative here. And we've only had 2 boot camps so far. I started this last year in September. I've only had 2 groups so far, but so far we've gotten really good results. These are some of the people in those. 433% return, 300. So this is possible with options. It's not like it can go 433% negative with options. So it's pretty cool.
Brilliant. That's awesome. I love that you'd like to bring this. We all have our thing that we feel compelled to bring to people, right? That when you watched all the crap and corruption of the era we've been in, and you saw so many people going sideways, I remember you saying you didn't even want to go into the public arena in any way. But here you are helping this way. So I appreciate you giving all of your time like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that because I think I mentioned on the last show, I'm retiring from the asset protection estate planning portion of my business. I'm retiring from that and just completely focusing on this. Because to me, I think this is my true calling. Because I'll admit I lost passion for my former work in the trust and company stuff, just because I found myself, I was like repeating the same stuff over and over, and I just like, gosh, I don't wake up every morning and get excited about that, And plus, it's not really a good time of my time or a good use of my time compared to this. So trading, I mean, your growth potential is unlimited there. And personally, I love the fact that it doesn't require working with people trading. It's not dependent on anyone else but yourself.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I really enjoyed the classes that I've listened to. They're engaging, and you're teaching very well and giving people opportunities to step up. You're not just like a talking head and letting people sit there. But is it okay if people are starting at the beginning? Is it okay if they do come and just take it in and they're not, creating their own plans, trade plans, for example? Or do you prefer not at this stage?
It's actually to your advantage if you're starting from scratch.
Okay.
If you're brand new to markets, that's good because you don't have to unlearn anything.
Right on.
Unfortunately, the way the trading education, what do you call it, industry is, you would have to unlearn so much, which a couple people in my group have had to do, and I had to call it out. You know? But yeah, I've seen quite a bit of success from newbies. You know, most of my testimonials are from newbies actually. I have a couple from DIY traders that have been doing it for years on their own. Didn't find success. So yeah, whether side of the spectrum you're on, you're gonna have to start from scratch. Everyone starts from the same spot.
It's the same in my work. If you come to it without a whole lot of like spiritual and new age indoctrination, it's easier for you. But if you already come full of all that and having practiced and maybe consulted and that kind of thing, then yeah, it is much harder to undo.
Yeah. Yeah, so exactly. I charge $109 a month for this, or you could, pay for the annual membership. So, some people might look at that as expense, but I see it as an investment for yourself because, gosh, my goal is for you to make back what you'd pay for a year within a few months. And we do have some people that as a result in the group. It's one of my testimonials. So, I mean, we had one guy after 2 months, he was up 80%. So yeah, I mean, you can try to do it on yourself. You're more than welcome to. Like I said, publics are available, or markets are available to anybody. But I enjoy this so much, Beth. So this is what it looks like. It's it has like this interface, and then like it's kind of like a social media on the community side, and then the classroom where the course material is, and then we have weekly mentoring meetings. So we're going through one lesson at a time. And then for the alumni, we have separate meetings that I'm going to implement. Because right now everyone was still brand new. So our last group agreed to start over again, watch the material.
Oh, good.
This most recent one, they're like, no, I think we get it now. So I'm going to have...
got it. Oh, not now then.
Yeah. And we meet every Thursday night, and I record it if you can't make it live, of course. So yeah, it's there. Our next boot camp actually starts on April 20th. So if you join now, you can get your spot.
Okay, very good. And so here's the link in the chat, and it's in the show notes.
Right.
So everyone can check that out.
But yeah, I just want to say, look, it may sound like I'm trying to sell this, but I don't think this is trading is for most people. Because yeah, if you have a problem getting around the mental blocks that we talked about earlier around money itself, you're not going to do well in this. If you don't want to work on that, you're not going to do well. Or if you're on the opposite side of the spectrum where you think like you're going to become a millionaire from this overnight, or you're going to get results right away, this is not for you. This is not a get-rich scheme at all. In fact, I structured this so that it's not just like, oh, you buy it and learn it, and then you go away. Like my whole point is to provide tools that traders do need in order to do this successfully, and I provide that in the group. So it's more of a lifetime career I'm thinking of. And if you don't think, if you look at trading as a get-rich scheme, you're not gonna do well. I like to look at it as a slow growth. Like I don't treat my trading portfolio as a source of income even. It's something that I'm constantly building. I'm not taking money out of my income actually. So I have this bubble here in my business, right? My other income streams, they flow into my trading account. It's not the other way around where I'm living off my trading account. Markets are always changing, and like you can't honestly say like, yeah, I make $10,000 a month trading. Like that's the gurus are going to tell you, right? You can take my course, you can make $10,000 a month. That's not possible. Now, after a year of trading, like, you can say, okay, I made this average. But to say like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and now just do this for a living, not only does not the math of that not work, because markets are always changing, you don't know what you're going to get, it's inconsistent, but also that's going to mess with your psychology, because then you're like, oh my God, I'm completely dependent on this now. It's going to become very emotional.
Yeah, you'll decide from fear, which is never good.
Exactly. Yeah, like, oh my god, I have a loss on this position. Like, oh, I have this winner down here. I had to cut off my winner, even though it could run even more. And now I just lost that potential. Yeah, I've seen some people do that. So
Mhm.
yeah, trading it's one of those things. You if you are gonna do it, I would recommend, whether it's through me or someone else, do not try to do it on your own, because you're not gonna have someone if you don't have someone looking over your shoulder. This is one of those things where it could go very wrong.
There you go. Well, fantastic. Thank you once again for joining us today. And is there anything else that we didn't cover before we start to close?
Oh man, I think yeah, I think we covered some good ground here.
Yeah, I think this is the best one yet. They've all been good, but you're really learning to present in a really nice way. So I appreciate that. Yeah, a lot.
That's good. Yeah, because like I said, I mean, as much as these things seem complex, it's quite simple when you are able to cut out the noise. So whether it's in any of my presentations, that's my main objective on complex subjects. So,
Very good. And I'll share your YouTube one more time too.
oh great.
I'm going to go back and see videos, and you're also going to see the evolution of Brendan's not so much knowledge, but the whole presentation and the focus and everything like that. I always love that. People go back in my work, and we were talking about Garrett Smith. If you go back, 4 or 5 years ago, you almost barely don't recognize him.
Oh
He
yeah.
has transformed, even physically transformed. It's a really good comparison
Wow.
just to see how his stuff is working for him. The shape of his head, the shape of his eyes, like things have
Hmm,
changed. Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Before I kept all this information private. I didn't want to share it. I wanted to gatekeep.
Yeah.
um, but then after a while, like some of my friends were saying, like, man, you should really share what you do. Like, you should put yourself out there more. And I was like, no, like I've been private for so long. Like I didn't have social media. I didn't put my face out there at all. So it was extremely uncomfortable for me. I think we talked about it on our first shows, like, hey, I am not used to this, like this online presence. But yeah, I mean, I'm so thankful that I did this, because I really felt called to do it, because I saw so much angst out there, and I saw all this bullshit being put in front of people. So instead of holding this to myself and some of my private clients, I just thought, if I want a change in society, that I do, it's not going to be done through secret channels that I have. It's going to be through helping everyday people, just like where I was at in my job experiences. So that is that's my main goal of all of this, is to um, take that problem of financial literacy that we talked about earlier, and whether you're a business owner or investor, which tail in my career, I'm leaning towards more the second half, right? But that is who I am looking to help.
That's beautiful and spoken like a true king hero. Yeah. So, if anyone would like to follow up on more interviews, I'm plus 300 at this point, so there's a lot to listen to. And thanks for coming, everybody, and participating in the chat. Thanks for your kind wishes. Nice to see you on Rumble and YouTube and Fakebook. X is also running. It's always sort of secret. I can't find it after the fact, but we're still on Vigilante TV, and Rockfin is dead. But this will be uploaded to all of my podcast channels. So if anybody wants to listen through audio or download or all of that kind of thing, it is there for you. I would love to request, I always put a plug in for my son, who is now 18 and has an excellent, well, actually, I'm trying to encourage him by people subbing to him to spend a lot more time uploading to his channel, but I'll share it anyway if you feel to. The music at the beginning was his, and so that's his channel there. And he's off having weekend adventures and going. We just got a huge dump of snow, which is classic for spring in Manitoba, and so they get to go sledding. And I don't mean like on sleds; they're like
Right.
like jump in the
Snowmobiles.
snowmobiles. That's it, exactly.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's
yeah,
fun.
super Yeah, he's thrilled. He can just get in his own car and go and be there and do his own thing. So yeah, it's pretty fun. And if you'd like to follow up with any of the work that I do, the great first step, if you haven't done it already, is to do an archetype quiz at my website, bethmartins.com. And in 10 minutes, you find out where on the path of purpose you are. It's the King Hero quiz, and you'll see how it's broken down into discrete archetypes that lead you to see something about yourself that you didn't see. So it's like Brennan was saying, this isn't for everyone. Not everyone wants to see what they don't see, because there's always, while it seems like a very fun game, there's always a moment of like, oh, I do that, or oh, I've been hurting myself, or oh, why do I keep doing that? And so I help people to figure out those patterns, not to think in a figure it out way, but to see what they don't see and be able to make new decisions about hidden programming. It is our Achilles heel. Until people learn to really see that, then they are controllable through fear. It's a fact, Jack. So I have an opportunity to do an archetype reading with me. The woman this morning that we just finished our little package of sessions with the reading, and she literally said, I've made miraculous changes. And I've got a recording of that. She gave me permission to share that out, like miraculous changes. She went from night and day in her relationship, what's happening and how she's interacting, to a completely new experience based on her change, not trying to change her husband, which everybody tries that first. So it's really fun for those that are brave and open and they're not satisfied with less than the truth and less than reality. Then this is a really good path. I'm going to be running a new training. I'm just graduating. I probably am going to graduate the biggest number of coaches in 1 month, 4 weeks, exactly 4 weeks time now. And something that the pandemic inspired me to create and to teach people to do what I do, to read archetypes, to help others deprogram and get to the bottom of some of the things that are nemesis to them and keep them stuck in not life-supporting patterns. So that new training is going to start in September, but right now I'm starting to open up for conversations where people can come and talk to me. There's going to be, I'll say, like secret hidden savings. This is to talk that language of the truthers that I won't be publishing, but if you sign up to talk with me now, it is going to be the best investment. So you can always reach me at my website, bethmartins.com. All roads lead there. If you want to apply to the House of Free Will and become part of an inner circle, I always say I have a small cult following, and I really love that because it's special people. They have a very unique disposition. They're not there to rail against the machine or do nothing. They want to dig in. They want to learn. They can go deep in these subjects and follow me in these areas. So it's wonderful. So beautiful. We had a 1 hour meeting the other day. It turned into 3 hours. We were so enjoying each other's company. So it's evolved and become really beautiful. So thank you once again, Brenton. It's been amazing. Do visit safe-haven.co, safe-havenco.com. And you can also, oh yeah, Johnny Carucci, I just noticed Bass Fishing. Yeah, he's going to be coming on. He just actually made an appointment with me. And also Garrett Kramer, who I'm going to get to know on the podcast, is going to be here on Monday. So that's sometimes how, but yeah, Johnny Carucci, if you haven't come across him, Brenton, he's a gooder. He's the outlier among outliers, kind of like we.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a special club where souls are invited. And so everyone have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks everyone for joining. And thanks again, Brendan, for being here.
Thanks, Beth. Good seeing you guys again.
Okay.
I'll see you later.
Welcome. Okay. I'm going to play us out. I'll set that up. Give me 1 second. And I didn't set this up yet. Grab my outro that my son Liam is playing on. There we go. I haven't learned how to do this nice. I need a stage manager or something like that. All right, everyone. Bye for now.